welcome to Safe and Just Michigan's Day of Empathy, remote. Hope everybody's safe. I hope everybody has power. There's a group of us who are stuck in a hotel room, and I've learned from my wife down in Arbor that we have no power at home. So I'm going to stay at the hotel as long as I can. I'm joking. It's great to have everybody here. I'm really excited about this panel. It's a great group of friends and individuals who have been doing this work for a long, long time. I'm Pete Martel. I'm a program coordinator at American Friends Service Committee. I was incarcerated here in Michigan from 1994 through 2008. While I was in there, I feel like a large part of me getting my life back on track was from the old timers who were in there, many of whom are still in there. And I always enjoyed doing this work and appreciate the opportunity to do this as a living in order to try to help out my old friends who I feel like I owe a huge debt of gratitude to. So I think I'd like to get started just with a brief round of introductions with our panelists. If we could, just let's maybe do a quick go around and tell who we are, what brings us to this work, and our interest in this work. And I think we can go with the order of the poster and start with Senator Jeff Irwin.
Thank you and good morning. My name is Jeff Irwin. I'm the state senator for the 15th district, which stretches from Ypsilanti down through Tecumseh, from Washtenaw County down into Lenawee and a little bit of Monroe as I pick up the whole city of Milan. I am really honored and fortunate to be doing this work with so many friends who are on this panel and on this call. And look, I mean, I think that part of my role as a public official and as someone who answers to the public is to make sure that our systems align with our philosophies and our values. And you know, one of my values is that our criminal justice system needs to be fair, it needs to be just, and it needs to be focused on rehabilitation. And if it's going to be focused on rehabilitation, we need to make sure that there are systems in place that support that and systems in place that respect that and allow that. And so that's why I'm proud to be working on criminal justice reform issues, specifically in this area around you know, sentencing and juvenile life without parole policy here today.
Thank you so much, Senator Irwin. Jose Burgos.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everybody. I'm Jose Burgos. I'm a formerly incarcerated juvenile lifer here in the state of Michigan. I served 27 years. I'm currently a reentry specialist at the State Appellate Defender's Office. I work with a lot of returning citizens, a lot of juvenile lifers who are in the process of getting out and just making sure that they have all the things that they need. And one of the things that brings me to the work, of course, you know, me being a former juvenile lifer, that's one of the things, but just to be able to give back, man. I was always committed to coming home and making something good come out of a bad situation. And I think this is the best way to do it, you know, is to come out here, you know, work with those coming home, you know what I'm saying? And, you know, just lend my voice and do what I can to make sure that those who have earned a second chance get that second chance. So that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Thanks, Jose. Next up, Sophie, please.
Morning, everybody. My name is Sophie Ordway. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a legal research analyst at Detroit Justice Center, where we help support trying to transform our criminal legal system, as well as develop and create equitable and just cities. I am very grateful to be on this panel. This topic is something that I have cared about deeply for a long time. I come to this work mostly because of my connection with a loved one who's currently incarcerated, but I also used to work in reentry, helping people on parole find employment. And since then, the more research I do into our criminal legal system, the more energized I am to keep doing this work. So thank you all for being here and for allowing me to be on this panel.
Thanks, Sophie. And last but certainly not least, Lawanda Hollister.
And of course, good morning, everyone. I am Lawanda Hollister. I'm a program coordinator for American Friends Service Committee, and I'm also in the Michigan Criminal Justice Program. and I appreciate being here this morning. What brings me to this work is my reentry issues that I had, because I was released in 2020 after serving 34 years, and the people that I left behind, I wanted to make sure that they didn't have to go through those issues and that they were able to get out. So that's what brings me to this work.
Excellent. Thanks so much. I'm excited for this conversation. For those in attendance, I think probably the best way to pose questions along the way, if you have them, is to use the chat, if that's available. I guess I'll check in on that. I think it's available to the attendees. But so I think it makes sense to start out, like, over 10 years ago, the US Supreme Court ruled in Miller versus Alabama that mandatory life without parole for juveniles was unconstitutional. And as we developed remedies for that and fixes for that, Michigan lagged in response a bit because our Attorney General at the time chose to challenge the retroactive application of that. So it was in 2016 then, once we started getting underway, where people who were at one point sentenced to life without parole were looking at, oh, we do have hope after all. And we started working on getting people out, and we've been tremendously successful with that. And now we're at a point where that work still continues. And I think we're trying to figure out, like, who can be safely released and who, if anybody, needs to stay in there for however long, should stay in there. And we've got a couple of very exciting bills that are being shopped around right now. I think it makes sense to start with the Juvenile Life Without Parole bill. And Senator Irwin, I think, has some good background on that. Would you mind telling us a bit about the bill and the need for it, and how things will look if it's passed?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Pete. And so, as you said, Miller v. Alabama came down over 10 years ago now, and the process here in Michigan in terms of reconsidering those cases, looking at resentencing, looking at who has an opportunity to be successful on the outside, has been extremely slow. And it's been very frustrating to me as a legislator to see that process not just get slowed down by the former Attorney General Bill Schuette, but also by county prosecutors. And now, it's been over a decade, and we still have folks who haven't had a chance to make it through that process. And we still have a law in the books here in Michigan that calls for or that allows a juvenile life without parole, which, as Mr. Martel said, is unconstitutional. The Supreme Court ruled, and as a result, we have, I think, an obligation and an opportunity in Lansing to align our statute with that constitutional requirement. This is cruel and unusual punishment. You can't lock away juveniles without any opportunity for them to see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's cruel and unusual. Let's get rid of that. So that's what we've proposed in legislation that we introduced last year, and we're preparing to introduce again this year. Now, some new things have happened, though. So we have new cases that are coming through, the Parker case and soon the Poole case as well. But specifically, we're looking at make sure that what we introduce reflects what is being said in these new cases, which are that, essentially, this policy of applying a term of years rather than life without parole to people who commit their offense when they're very young needs to extend to folks who are under 19, folks who are still 18 when they commit their crime. So we're looking at proposing legislation again, similar to the legislation we proposed last year, that will align our state statute with the Constitution, and that will align our state statute with that philosophy I talked about earlier, which is that we believe in rehabilitation. We want to provide opportunities for rehabilitation, and we particularly want to make sure that people who commit their offenses when they're very, very young get those opportunities, and get those opportunities regularly during their time. We also want to make sure that our statutes align with the data that shows that these individuals, these folks who were sentenced to juvenile life without parole, are very successful when they get out. And that's true here in Michigan, and it's true all over the country. So we're looking to build on some of the states who have already done this. There's states all across the country who've already taken this action, and Michigan, like we were slow in resentencing, has been slow to align our statute with the U.S. Constitution. So we're going to propose that. We would have, I think, had that bill introduced already, if not for the snowstorm that has pushed us to a virtual Day of Empathy event. But those bills are going to be introduced imminently, and I think Mr. Martel asked, what would it look like if these bills were to get passed? Well, what it would look like if the bills are to be passed in the form that they are proposed is that when a juvenile is sentenced to a term of years, it would be that. It would be a term of years, not a juvenile life without parole. And under our proposal, the first review would take place at 10 years. And so that's the policy we're setting to establish. That's some of the rationale behind why we're doing it this way. And that's, I think, the key change that we're proposing in these bills is to replace and eliminate juvenile life without parole and replace it with a statute that says when juveniles are convicted of very serious crimes, they're going to be sentenced to a term of years extending from 10 years to 60 years. But with that first review, with that first chance to get in front of a parole hearing at 10 years.
Thank you very much. That's great. And gosh, how things would change drastically for the better if that passed. Jose, would you mind talking a bit?
I see a question already, though, that I'm just going to answer right away, which is it retroactive? Yes, it is retroactive. That's a key point that I should have made in my description. So sorry to throw you off track if I am, but yes, it is retroactive, and I should have added that. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for letting me know that the chat's been activated. That's great. I see some other hands up. Please put your questions in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on it, and we'll try to answer them as best we can as they come up. While we're on the topic of juvenile life without parole, Jose, would you mind talking about your experiences with it and your thoughts on the potential bill and the relief?
Yeah. First of all, I want to say that I think it's that time. I think it's that time for Michigan to finally come into line with that ruling from the Supreme Court and join the other states. Recently, we had Illinois who abolished life without parole for children. I just found out that just last night, New Mexico, the Senate passed a bill on the Senate side that would do the same thing there as well. As far as me personally, I was 16 years old when I was sentenced to life without parole. I was released at the age of 43. And since then, I've been working, like I mentioned earlier, I've been working as a reentry specialist, working with a lot of the men and women who are being released, in particular, juvenile lifers. One thing about this law is that, so far, a lot of the vast majority of juveniles, have come home, are, entrepreneurs. There's a lot of them out here working in different organizations. And there are just some that are just, came out here and are working, their jobs, and they're living with their families. And so I say that to say that, we have proven that we are a safe community to release, that we come home and we grow out of crime, and it's also not only here in Michigan, over in the rest of the country, over 900 juveniles thus far has been released. So this legislation makes a lot of sense. And again, this is not a get out of jail free card. In order for you to come home, that you have to show that while you were incarcerated, you did all the necessary things to correct your behavior, to do things a lot better, and come out here and be a productive member of society. So I think this legislation just makes a lot of sense. We're talking about children here, that go into prison at the age of 14, 15, 16, and are thrown away and told that they are the worst of the worst, and that, they'll never be, any good. And yet, so many of us have come out here and showed different, So I think this legislation is very important, and it's that time for Michigan to just, fall in line with it.
Thanks, Jose. I'm seeing a lot of questions related to like different age groupings, different avenues of potential relief for others. at different ages when they committed their crime. So I think probably now it makes good sense to transition over to the other bill that we'll be talking about on this panel, which is second look legislation. And in its current form, second look seeks to address a lot of the problems we have in Michigan about people who are serving these really, really long sentences. And there is no avenue for release, regardless of their behavior, regardless of who they mature into, regardless of, you know, what they learn and who they develop into while they're in there. So second look in its current form would give everybody who's in prison, regardless of what their sentence is, regardless of what the conviction was, it would give them an opportunity to petition their sentencing court to reconsider the sentence and to reduce the sentence after they've served 10 years. So that could affect somebody who has a 12-year minimum, or it could affect somebody who has a life sentence in Michigan. Once you serve the 10 years, it gives you a chance to go back in front of the judge or that judge's successor, if they're no longer on the bench, and have the judge like reconsider, take a second look at the person's sentence after they've served a bit of time in prison, a bit of time being 10 years. It's a shame that I think that I've been in Michigan for so long. So this isn't dependent, of course, on brain science. This isn't dependent on any like specific age. This is dependent on you committed a crime, you were sentenced to prison for that crime. And once you've been in prison for the 10 years, we're going to take a look at like what you've been up to and who you are now. And it's not a one-time shot, right? If that's denied, you could reappeal further down the road. And I think it's an exciting and progressive change, and also a really good chance for people to hold out hope and to have some reward that pushes them or pulls them towards making the most of their time while they're in prison. So if I may, I'd like to have Sophie talk a bit about this huge chunk of people that we have in Michigan's prisons that are now serving these ridiculously long sentences, many of whom have no hope for release right now. Ms. Ordway.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, so I'm going to jump into a lot of numbers here. So bear with me, and I'm happy to share any of this data with folks that want to see it after the panel as well. So if we look at the statistical data that the Michigan Department of Corrections has been reporting for decades on the age demographics of people in prison, it's very easy to see that our prison population is aging. In 1984, 2% of people in prison were 55 years or older, and 88% were under the age of 40. If we fast forward to 2021, we now have almost 18% of people in prison who are over the age of 55, and the number of people under 40 has dropped down to 51%. So that means almost half of the people in our prisons in Michigan are over the age of 40. Another way to look at it is at our average age of people in prison. In 1984, it was 30, and now it's 39. The people over the age of 75, the number of people over the age of 75 in 1984 was 8 people. In 2021, there were 293 people in Michigan's prisons over the age of 75. So part of the reason we have so many more people in prison who are older is at least partly because we've been sentencing people, or because we had this long stretch of time in the 80s and 90s where people were given incredibly long sentences, like the juvenile life without parole sentences and other people that just got sentenced to long and indeterminate sentences. In 1984, we had a total prison population of just under 14,500 people, and just over 3,500 of those people, or roughly 25%, were serving sentences of 15 years or longer. Now, if we fast forward again to 2021, we have over 32,000 people in prison, and almost half of that entire population, over 15,500 people, are serving sentences of 15 years or longer. So, and we also know that compared to other states, we have some of the longest sentences in the country. Michigan does. In 2012, the Pew Center released a report that found Michigan had the longest average time served in prison, and that was only looking at people who had been released. It wasn't even counting the people currently serving prison sentences, like the long and indeterminate sentences we're talking about today. So when we combine the age data, the number of people that are over the age of 55 in prison, with the sentence data, the number of people that have these long and indeterminate sentences, we have we find that most people who are over 55 are the ones serving these long and lengthy sentences. So this makes unfortunate sense. We've known for a long time as people, as Jose and Senator Irwin have said, that people age out of crime. So why else would a 55, a 60, or a 70-year-old be in prison if they weren't serving a long and indeterminate sentence? It's not like they just got there. We don't have a bunch of 55 and 60-year-olds out here committing crimes. So bear with me while I do a little bit more math. The number of people in prison who are 55 or older currently serving long and indeterminate sentences is roughly 4,200 people, 4,200 people. And the total number of people serving these long and indeterminate sentences is just over 15,500 people. Remember, that's almost 50% of our entire population of people in prison. So if only 1/3 of the people now serving these long sentences are over the age of 55, but we've got another 2/3 of people serving long and indeterminate sentences, those people are going to continue to age in prison, and 10, 15, 20, 40 years down the road, they're still going to be sitting there getting older, and we'll be paying for them, and they won't be in their communities receiving the care that they need if we don't do anything like implement this second look legislation. And putting the numbers aside, we know that we started and continued this practice of sentencing people to long and indeterminate sentences based on misinformation and fear mongering that spread rapidly during the 80s and 90s. But if we go back to the data and the research, we also know that, like I mentioned, and like Jose and Senator Irwin mentioned, that people age out of crime. We've known that for decades. So, and we also have this group of people in Michigan and across the country who were originally sentenced as juveniles to life without parole that have since been resentenced and are now a perfect example of how people, not only people age out of crime, but also people who commit seriously violent crimes are the least likely to reoffend. We have data from the 1960s and 70s of the Michigan Department of Corrections knowing this and encouraging the governors to continue to release people that were sentenced to life for homicide because of how successful they were when their sentences were shortened and commuted and they were able to come home. And recent studies still confirm this. And again, the people that have been released because of the Miller decision also confirm this. People age out of crime, and people who commit violent crimes are the least likely to reoffend. So those are the main two reasons, in addition to all of the numbers and the data, why second look legislation and this juvenile life without parole legislation are important, and we need to implement them. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Sophie. There was a request asking if there was a possibility that you could put those statistics and numbers in the chat. I don't know if you have them like readily available or if you're just coming off the top of your head with them.
I definitely can. I can copy and paste them in there.
Great, that would be, thank you. So those numbers, they tell a really kind of gloomy story about where we're at right now. We've had a ton of great changes, and we've seen a great decrease in the number of people who are locked up in Michigan's prisons in recent years, right? We've gone from 51,000 people in 2007 down to about 33,000 or whatever, somewhere around 33,000 right now. The problem is that we have all of these people who were brought in during the get tough on crime era with these really, really long sentences that just don't have a release mechanism. So as the population decreases and as people come in with short sentences and then they're released, we've got this body of people who are taking up a larger and larger proportion of the population in prison. And these are adult prisons. They're not hospice care facilities. They're not long-term adult care facilities. We see this like with the average age, and we see this like definitely in those like really dark numbers that Sophie just talked about. The number of people who are now over the age of 70 and people even over the age of 80 in prison, where that was just unheard of before in Michigan's history. There's very just like personal stories in every one of these 33,000 cases inside prisons. And I've learned so much from so many people along my way in there. Lawanda, I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about, you spent quite a bit of time in the Department of Corrections here in Michigan, and I'm wondering if you can talk about like some of the women that you've met along the way and your experiences in there, especially with regards to other women who are serving these really, really long sentences in Michigan.
Yes. First, I want to, in line with the Day of Empathy, Jose said something about Michigan not being in line. I think that it has taken us so long to even try to get in line with what is right in the law, is because they're thinking that we're going to get a get out of jail free card. And that's simply not the case. I served 36 years and I've met a lot of people. And as people have repeatedly said, we age out of crime. And there comes a moment, and I was told this when I first entered the prison by one of my old heads. So when I first entered the prison, that I would have a moment. Didn't know what that meant and just put it to the side. But if allowed, I'd like to tell this little story. There were two young ladies that had committed a crime. They had unfortunately killed a man and they were being sentenced. And I had been in prison for a very long time at this point. And I never ever watched the news because it's gloomy. So I don't want to see that. So I watched the widow. I don't know what made me watch the news this particular day, but I watched the news and the widow stood up in defense of her husband and told the ladies, you do not know what it is that you just did. It's a simple statement. It could have been said by anyone. That was my moment. That was my moment that I knew everything that I had done in the past and how it came back, the changes I need to make, the changes I had made the entire time. That was my moment. And I knew from when I first entered prison that that would be my moment. And I know that everybody that's been in prison is going to have that moment. And I know that my people, and I like my taboo, had that moment. She had that moment where we understand, what has happened, and we need to get it together and move forward. And that was my moment. And I know a lot of my people on the inside have had that moment. And I feel like that's what is holding the state up for moving forward with this. Is I want them to know we're having our moment. We're having our moment. There's no sense for us to age out of crime and still be incarcerated unnecessarily.
Thanks,
That
Lawanda.
is it, Pete.
That's great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. I'm going to try to catch up a little bit. We've got a ton of great questions. So everything that we've been talking about with the second look legislation, none of it's dependent on your age at the time of the crime. None of it's dependent on any set factors. And yes, it absolutely applies retroactively for people who are like, that's why we need it. We have 16,000 people serving these sentences, and many of them are sentenced to die in prison. And this would be a way to like reconsider whether that's the smart route forward with every single one of these cases. So the bill in its current state, it has a bunch of great concepts that were brought together by large work groups of people who have been involved with this stuff, or people who have done policy work on this. And we've worked on this for a couple of years now. And we were sent a great like model of this legislation from a national organization that's been working with it around the states. So yes, things like actual innocence and things like ineffective assistance of counsel and different things that would normally come up on appeal in a legal forum. These are all things that could be considered during like the second round of that petition. So there's currently two parts to this where you would petition the judge, and the judge would have to consider X amount of factors, and in many different circumstances that I think would apply to the population. Certainly the older that people get in there, the more likelihood they would have to then advance to the second phase of the actual sentence reduction. There's a prohibition on increasing sentences. There are, I think, some good presumptions that things will be, that things will point towards a sentence reduction. There's appellate protections. Overall, I think the bill looks really good, and I'm generally a large skeptic of this. But yes, so it's not at all premised on your age, and it's not dealing just with juveniles. It's for anybody who came in, because I think we learned like that Michigan was number 3 on the list of actual number of people serving mandatory life without parole as juveniles. I think it made a lot of us kind of scratch our heads about where we are in Michigan and what we're doing. And as people started coming out, and as the population started to change these demographics, I think we've realized that, wow, it's safe. It's not going to be the end of the world if people get out of prison after they serve 20 or 30 or 40 years. Just a minute ago, Lawanda was talking about her friend Taboo, and it's a sad, tragic case that we worked on for quite a bit in American Friends Service Committee. Taboo was locked up at 20 years old back in, I think, 1976. First degree murder. She killed somebody that she felt was a threat to her, who was going to kill her. And she made no bones about it. She didn't try to minimize her involvement with it at all. But she was 20 years old, and she was incarcerated this whole time. And over a year ago, she was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. And we petitioned the governor's office for medical commutation. The parole board reviewed everything, and they said, we don't think that this has any merit. And Ms. Dunlap died on January 9th of this year. She served 46 years in prison. And every one of those years cost taxpayers money that we could be using for other things to make safer and healthier communities. And that's 46 years, time after year after year after year. That's a huge, huge amount of money, especially when we talk about healthcare costs related to aging and treating illnesses and sicknesses in prison. So Taboo's not the only case, right? We've got a huge chunk of people in there, and I don't know what it is that we necessarily get out of somebody dying in prison. They've lived in there for so long that they then die in prison. So I think Second Look is a good avenue, and it's a good fix that would absolutely apply retroactively. We would need that, of course. Jose, do you have, so Lawanda had a chance to like talk about some of the people that she served time with and just her experiences along the way. I think it's really important to put these stories along with these statistics that like all point in one direction. But I think just like the personal individual stories are incredibly important. And unfortunately, it's not like we can conduct this webinar from in prison, where people who are in prison serving these sentences can participate and people can get to know them. But to the extent that we can maybe tell their stories and tell about them, I think is like really important.
Yeah, I was listening to Lawanda, and when she mentioned having that moment, I think that's a true statement, because I had that moment. I had that moment when I was on the inside serving my time, and as I got older and started maturing, I reflected back on what I had did. You know what I'm saying? And I said it to say that, I think about, sometimes, when we're doing this work and we're trying to advocate to change the system, people think that we forget about victims, and that's not the case. There's been so many times, since I've been home, where we've gotten together with formerly incarcerated, and our victims come up all the time. And I think a lot of us, in many ways, are motivated, are motivated by trying to correct that wrong that we did. I know, for those of us who committed crimes where a life was lost, of course, we can't bring that back, you know what I'm saying? But the work that we do and coming out here and becoming productive citizens, I think it's the best way to try to correct that, so I wanted to make sure, that the victims don't get lost in this, you know what I'm saying? Because, there's a lot of loss and there's a lot of harm that we've done. And I think, and the good thing about, for juvenile lifers, even though our second chance came at, from a court ruling, we still kind of serve somewhat of as a case study, you know what I'm saying, to show that we can, safely be released, and so I think, our second chance came from a court ruling, and we've shown that those of us who committed violent crimes and served decades of incarceration can safely be released. And so I think that's a good thing, to show for the second chance legislation as well. But yeah, those moments that Lawanda was speaking about, man, like, many of us have them. And when we have those moments on the inside and we realize what we've done, we try our best and we do our best to try to make sure that we make those corrections. And, and for victims, what better way to try to correct the harm that we've done than to come out here and become these productive citizens, to become advocates for a better system. So I think, yeah, you hit around the nose, Lawanda, with that, having that moment, because I definitely had that moment where I knew that the life that I was living was not productive. There was just more as a child when I went in. At first, I couldn't believe that I could even be sentenced to life without parole. But it really didn't sink in until I had my moment. And when I had my moment, I knew that even though I was in there serving life without parole, I still wanted, I wanted to be a better life. I wanted, my life had to be more than just life without parole. You know what I'm saying? So I started making those changes on the inside way before the conversation of juvenile life without parole even came into effect. You know what I'm saying? To just correct those mistakes. So, both of these legislations are very important. They're good, and I think we should support them here in Michigan.
Yes, if allowed to say something,
Of course.
second look is a second chance. We never, ever forget the victims. And I want that to be said. I have victims and I try to respect them at all times. And to be doing this work and the going forward is this is my apology, my sorry. And we all have that moment. And so I just want it to be understood that we're not trying to ask for a get out of jail free card. The judge or whatever, they're going to do this. We're not like, let us all out, hey, we don't care what we did. We don't care who we hurt or none of that. That is not this. That is not this at all. Second look is a second chance. And we're trying to be the face of it works.
It certainly does, Lawanda. And thanks for proving that point. Appreciate you, and appreciate that I get to work with you daily. So we're wrapping up shortly. There's a ton of questions that have gone unanswered. I guess I would just say, if the panelists are willing to put their emails in the chat so people can contact all of us with questions and we can follow up with individual questions. There was one question that caught my eye about the capacity of the courts to handle this influx of petitions that they'll receive, and like, how would we go about figuring out priorities for this? Each county is going to be in its own situation, right? Wayne County will have a huge chunk of cases, and how to figure out like who should get into court first. I think that's probably something that will get worked out in the legislation. Lots of different concepts come up, like when you look at each county, how do you figure out how to prioritize what? You can look at like the people's current age, and you can also obviously look at the amount of time they've already served, which would, I think, be pretty similar to what we had legislated in the original juvenile life without parole remedy bill. Lots of questions about what people can do to help and to find out more about the legislation. And we have an expert on this panel for that. Senator Irwin, what can we do to help? How can we be involved?
Well, thanks, Pete. And as you can see, we've got some excellent advocates and folks like Jose and Lawanda, and who can get out and tell their stories. And I think make a very compelling case on behalf of Second Look and ending juvenile life without parole. But we also need a chorus of voices back in the community. And I think there were a lot of different questions sort of about how can we advance this? When are we going to have bill numbers? Where can we find the bill numbers? All that kind of stuff. I put my email in the chat, and my information and my office contact should be very, very easy to find. These bills are going to be introduced very, very soon, and so we should have bill numbers very, very quickly. We hope to, frankly, have them for today on juvenile life without parole, but because session was canceled, we didn't end up getting those bill numbers. So those will be ready very, very soon. And what I think folks need to do is actually quite simple. You need to have a conversation with your legislator, whether that is over email or over the phone, or whether that's at a town hall meeting or one of the regular sort of coffee conversations that legislators often have in their communities. You need to show up either virtually or personally and ask them what they think about this issue. There's tremendous power in just showing up and saying, look, I believe in second chances. I think our justice system and our public safety system would be stronger if we gave folks a second chance. Here's this legislation that I'm interested in. What do you think? If you do that in the community, it's going to make a big impact because one, your legislators are going to, presumably have to reckon with that question and take a position. And two, it's just very powerful when we as members hear from people in our communities about what's important to them and what they want to see us support. There is, I think, philosophically, a lot of support for ideas like Second Look and ideas like ending juvenile life without parole. But as you can imagine, my colleagues and myself, who are all out here running for political office, sometimes are concerned about the political ramifications of supporting anything that could be messaged as soft on crime. And if you paid any attention to the elections last year, you'll notice that there are a whole army of people out there lying about crime. There is a whole army of people. In fact, there's a whole industry out there to tell everyone that they should be scared and that violent crime is on the rise. And yet anyone who takes an honest look at the statistics sees that violent crime is at a historic low. We've seen violent crime drop decade after decade after decade. And so, what we need politically we need some voices out there in the community who are meeting those lies with the truth and who are specifically asking their legislators to do something about the fact that we have way too many people locked up for way too long. Why is it, Mr. or Mrs. Legislator, that we have the longest average length of stay in our prisons? Shouldn't that be something that we're looking at? And what are you doing about it? There's tremendous power in asking that question and being present politically and making sure that these perspectives are out there in the public discussion. Because you better believe the lies about how everyone should be scared of violent crime, that perspective's out there, and it's out there in a big way. And so that's really important work. I'll close by just saying that not only, I think, do we have to act individually and show up in these places and make calls and write emails to our legislators asking them to support this kind of policy, but we also have to organize. And I would just encourage you to connect with some of the great organizations that are a part of Day of Empathy, the sponsor organizations of this event, and many of the people who are here participating in the chat are organized with different organizations that are touching the criminal justice community, and getting involved in those organizations, working with them to spread these messages in a structured way is incredibly powerful. Getting organized with your faith community. I saw some questions about, are there resources to go and talk to our churches? Getting involved in your faith community, getting involved in other organizations that you're a part of. Is exactly the kind of work we need to do to create the positive political energy to propel these kinds of ideas to success. There's always a political headwind when you're talking about trying to reform our system and make it more fair and make it more functional. There's always a political headwind there, and folks who support it need to be pushing on that, need to be creating a tailwind, need to be creating energy for the idea that we can have a smarter, safer system, and that we should be giving people second chances.
Thank you, Senator Irwin. great guidance. We all know what to do. Thanks everybody for attending the panel. It's 11:45. We have another panel starting at 12 o'clock. I want to give everybody some time in between panels. Please remember that the link that you used to get on this one is the same link you'll use to get on the bail reform panel at 12 o'clock. Thanks to all of our panelists for joining us. It's been a great conversation, and let's all take care of each other and remember that a new world is possible. Have a great day.